I never thought a simple greenhouse would spark what felt like World War III in our quiet neighborhood. But when Patricia Miller from the HOA set her sights on my backyard garden paradise, she had no idea she was picking a fight with the wrong homeowner. The whole debacle started on a perfectly pleasant Saturday morning in April. I was in my newly constructed greenhouse, a beautiful 12x16 cedar frame structure with polycarbonate panels that I'd spent the winter building. It sat in the far corner of my 1-acre property in Lakewood, Colorado, catching the morning sun perfectly. I, Ethan Nielsen, had finally achieved my dream of year-round gardening in our temperamental climate. I was carefully transferring some tomato seedlings when the sharp rap on the greenhouse door made me jump. Standing there with a scowl that could curdle milk was Patricia Miller, clipboard in hand and HOA badge prominently displayed on her beige cardigan like she was some sort of neighborhood sheriff. "Mr. Nielsen," she said, her voice as cold as February in the Rockies. "I'm here about this." Structure. I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried for a friendly smile. "Good morning, Patricia. Nice to see you too. What can I help you with?" Patricia's eyes narrowed as she looked around my greenhouse with obvious distaste. This greenhouse was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee. It violates Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our HOA bylaws regarding outdoor structures. I took a deep breath. Actually, I did submit the plans. 3 months ago. I have the approval right here in my files. "Well, I don't have any record of it," she sniffed, making a note on her clipboard. "And regardless, it exceeds the height limitations by at least 2 feet. It needs to come down. You have 30 days to remove it." I felt my blood pressure rising. "That's not possible, Patricia. I have written approval for this exact design and location. The committee signed off on it. I'm the chair of that committee now, Mr. Nielsen, and I'm telling you this structure is not approved." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps you're confused about what was actually approved." "I'm not confused about anything," I said firmly. "I have the paperwork with Michael Thompson's signature on it." "Michael is no longer on the committee," she said dismissively. "Things have changed. You'll receive the official notice by mail, but consider yourself informed." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and those raised garden beds along your side fence, also not approved. Those will need to go as well." As she marched across my lawn, I noticed her taking photos of my property with her phone. That's when I remembered something critically important, that Patricia seemed to have forgotten something about water lines and easements. I went inside and pulled out my property documents, spreading them across my dining table. There it was, the water easement documentation. When I purchased this property 5 years ago, I discovered that the main water line servicing Patricia Miller's house ran directly through my land. The previous owner had granted an easement to her property decades ago when the homes were first built. According to my deed, this easement was revocable with proper notice if the dominant estate, Patricia's property, created undue hardship for the servient estate, my property. It was a clause I'd never given much thought to until now. I spent the rest of the weekend researching Colorado property law and easements, making careful notes and developing a plan. By Monday morning, I was ready. The formal violation notice arrived in my mailbox on Tuesday, a stern letter demanding the removal of my greenhouse within 30 days or face daily fines of $100. It was signed by Patricia Miller, HOA president. I made copies of all my documentation, the approved plans for my greenhouse, the easement documents, and the relevant Colorado statutes, and headed to see my lawyer, Oliver Whitman. Oliver had helped me with the purchase of my property and knew the details of the easement situation. When I explained what was happening, He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Patricia Miller is overstepping," he said after reviewing everything. "Your greenhouse approval is in order, and she can't retroactively deny it just because she's new to the committee. As for the easement—" He smiled. "That's a powerful card to hold, Ethan, but are you sure you want to play it? This could get ugly." "She started it," I said, sounding childish even to my own ears. "But seriously, I spent thousands on that greenhouse. I'm not taking it down when I followed every rule." "All right then," Oliver nodded. "Let me draft a response to the HOA violation and a separate notice regarding the potential easement revocation. But first, let's try to resolve this amicably. Document everything from now on." The following day, I requested a meeting with the full HOA board. They agreed to meet the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. When I arrived, 5 board members sat behind a long table like a tribunal. Patricia was center stage, flanked by 2 older gentlemen and 2 women I recognized from neighborhood gatherings. "Mr. Nielsen," Patricia began once I'd taken my seat across from them, "we understand you wish to appeal the violation notice regarding your unapproved greenhouse." "That's correct," I said calmly, pulling out my folder. "I have here the original plan submitted on January 12th, along with the approval signed by Michael Thompson on February 3rd. I slid copies across the table. "As you can see, everything was done according to proper procedures." One of the men, whose nameplate read Richard Baker, picked up the approval document and examined it. "This appears to be in order, Patricia." Patricia's face flushed slightly. "Michael didn't have the authority to approve structures that exceed our height restrictions." "Actually," I continued, pulling out another document, "the height restriction for detached structures is 12 feet. My greenhouse is 10 feet at its highest point. Here are the measurements certified by the contractor." The other board members exchanged glances. "Well," Patricia said stiffly, "there's still the matter of the materials. Polycarbonate panels are not on our approved materials list." "The approved materials list specifically mentions glass or similar transparent materials for greenhouse construction. Polycarbonate is the industry standard for modern greenhouses." Again, this was all covered in my approved application. The meeting continued for nearly an hour, with Patricia raising one objection after another, each of which I calmly countered with documentation. The other board members were growing visibly uncomfortable. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "I move that we rescind the violation notice regarding Mr. Nielsen's greenhouse, as it appears to have been properly approved by the previous committee member." "Seconded," said one of the women quickly. Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is highly irregular. I've documented numerous covenant violations on Mr. Nielsen's property. The raised beds, the excessive vegetable gardening in the front yard, the rain barrel system, none of which are violations according to our current bylaws," interrupted Richard. "Colorado state law specifically protects homeowners' rights to install rain barrels, and our covenants were updated last year to allow food gardening." The vote was 4-1 in my favor, with only Patricia objecting. I thanked the board and prepared to leave, thinking the matter was resolved. "This isn't over," Patricia hissed as I passed her chair. "Your precious garden oasis is an eyesore, and I'll find a way to make you comply with proper neighborhood standards." I paused. "Patricia, I've tried to be neighborly here. I followed all the rules." "Maybe we could just save it," she snapped. "People like you move in and think you can do whatever you want. This neighborhood has standards." I left feeling victorious but uneasy. Patricia's hostility seemed disproportionate to a simple greenhouse dispute. The following week confirmed my concerns. Every day brought a new complaint. My trash cans were left out too long, they weren't. My lawn exceeded the 4-inch height restriction, it didn't. My mailbox needed painting, I'd painted it 3 months ago. Each complaint came with photos and threats of fines. Then things escalated. I returned from work one day to find a water utility crew in my backyard. "What's going on?" I asked the foreman. "HOA called us to inspect the water line running through your property. Said there might be a leak affecting the Miller residence." I frowned. "There's no leak, and they can't authorize you to enter my property without my permission." The foreman looked uncomfortable. "Madam said she was authorized to grant access for utility maintenance." "She absolutely is not," I said firmly. "I need you to leave now, please. If there's a legitimate concern about the water line, the HOA needs to contact me directly." After they left, I installed security cameras covering my entire property and called Oliver. "This is getting out of hand," I told him. "I think it's time to play that card." The following morning, I hand-delivered 2 letters. The first went to the HOA board formally documenting Patricia's harassment and unauthorized entry to my property. The second went to Patricia directly, informing her that due to her actions creating an undue hardship on my property, I was invoking my right to revoke the water easement through my land, giving her the legally required 90-day notice to make alternative arrangements. I didn't have to wait long for the reaction. Patricia was at my door within the hour, waving the letter in my face. "You can't do this," she screeched. "My water line has been running through this property for 30 years. "Yes, as a courtesy easement that is legally revocable with proper notice," I replied calmly, making sure my security camera captured the interaction. "You've chosen to make my life difficult, Patricia. Actions have consequences. You'll regret this," she threatened. "The HOA will make your life a living hell. Every action the HOA takes against me from this point forward will be scrutinized by my attorney for evidence of retaliation," I informed her. "And Colorado law is very clear about HOA harassment." She stormed off, and I closed my door, wondering if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. The reality was that rerouting her water line would be expensive and disruptive, but legally, I was within my rights. The next day, the full HOA board requested an emergency meeting with me. I agreed, but insisted it be held at my lawyer's office with Oliver present. All 5 board members attended, looking significantly less confrontational than before. Patricia sat silently at the end, arms crossed. "Mr. Nielsen," Richard began, "we're concerned about the escalating situation between you and Mrs. Miller. Revoking the water easement seems extreme." "I agree," I replied. "I would have preferred a neighborly resolution." Unfortunately, after the greenhouse was approved and validated by this very board, Mrs. Miller continued to file baseless complaints against my property and authorized utility workers to enter my land without permission. Oliver spread out a timeline of events we'd prepared. My client has documented 17 separate harassing actions in the past 3 weeks. This pattern constitutes HOA harassment under Colorado Statute 3833.3 209.5. The board members reviewed our documentation with growing discomfort. "We were not aware of the extent of this situation," said one of the women, Janet Simmons. "Patricia assured us she was following proper procedures, like entering my client's property without permission," Oliver asked mildly. Richard cleared his throat. "What would it take to resolve this situation amicably, Mr. Nielsen?" "I want 3 things," I said. "First, a formal acknowledgement that my greenhouse and gardens are in compliance with HOA regulations. Second, Mrs. Miller recuses herself from any matters involving my property due to demonstrable bias. Third, the harassment stops immediately. And the water easement? Richard asked. That's between Mrs. Miller and me, I replied. But I'm willing to discuss rescinding my revocation if we can come to a mutual understanding. Patricia finally spoke up. This is blackmail. He's using the easement to force the HOA to let him violate our community standards. Patricia, Richard said firmly, enough. Mr. Nielsen has documented approval for his structures, and your actions appear to constitute harassment. The board needs to discuss this privately. They asked us to step out while they deliberated. 20 minutes later, we were called back in. The board has voted to issue a formal acknowledgement that Mr. Nielsen's property improvements are in compliance, Richard announced. Additionally, Patricia will recuse herself from matters involving Mr. Nielsen's property, and all pending complaints against his property are dismissed. Patricia looked like she might explode but remained silent. Thank you, I said. I appreciate the board taking this matter seriously. As we were leaving, Patricia caught up to me in the hallway. This isn't over. That water line has been there for decades. You can't just cut off my water. I'm not cutting off your water, Patricia. I'm revoking an easement with proper notice as allowed by law. You have 3 months to make alternate arrangements. Do you have any idea how much it would cost to reroute that line? She demanded. Probably about the same as it would cost me to tear down and rebuild my greenhouse, I replied. Actions have consequences. The following weeks were surprisingly quiet. I noticed Patricia watching me from her window whenever I worked in my garden, but the complaints stopped. I continued to document everything just in case. Then, 3 weeks before the easement revocation would take effect, something unexpected happened. Patricia's husband, Bill, knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. Bill Miller was a quiet man who'd always given me a friendly wave but generally stayed out of neighborhood drama. He looked uncomfortable standing on my porch. "Ethan, do you have a minute to talk?" he asked. "Sure, Bill. Come in." I led him to my kitchen and offered him coffee. Once seated, Bill sighed heavily. "I want to apologize for everything that's been happening. Patricia, well, she's going through some things. That's not an excuse, but maybe an explanation." "What kind of things?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Her garden club disbanded last year. She'd been president for a decade. Then she lost the election for her church committee position. The HOA presidency was all she had left. He stared into his coffee. "She's always found meaning in having some authority, and lately she's felt like everything's slipping away." I felt a twinge of sympathy despite everything. "That doesn't justify harassment, Bill. I know, and that's not why I'm here." He looked up at me. "The water line issue, we got estimates to reroute it. It's going to cost nearly $30,000. We just don't have that kind of money right now with our daughter's college tuition." I sat back, considering this. "What are you asking exactly?" "Is there any way you'd reconsider the easement revocation? Patricia was wrong, but this will financially devastate us." I thought about it for a long moment. "I need to know the harassment will stop permanently, Bill, not just from Patricia but from the HOA in general." "I understand." "She's agreed to step down as HOA president. Richard Baker will take over next week." This surprised me. "She's resigning," Bill nodded. "Richard made it a condition after consulting with the HOA's lawyer. They're concerned about legal liability from her actions. And between us, I think she needs the break." I drummed my fingers on the table thinking. "I'll tell you what, Bill. I'm willing to negotiate a new, clearly defined easement agreement instead of revoking it entirely. But I want it in writing that the HOA acknowledges my property is in compliance, and I want some assurance that Patricia will leave me alone." Bill looked relieved. "That seems fair. What kind of assurance would you need?" "An apology would be a start," I said. "And maybe Maybe Patricia could benefit from seeing what I'm actually doing with my greenhouse. Bill looked confused. What do you mean? I grow vegetables for the community food bank. Last year I donated over 800 pounds of produce. It's why I wanted a greenhouse to extend the growing season. Bill's expression changed to one of surprise. I had no idea. Patricia always just called it an eyesore. Maybe that's part of the problem, I suggested. She never asked what it was for. 2 days later, I was surprised to see both Bill and Patricia walking up my driveway. Patricia looked like she was being marched to her execution, but she was there. "Mr. Nielsen," she began stiffly when I opened the door. "I've come to apologize for my behavior regarding your greenhouse and garden. It was inappropriate." It wasn't the most sincere apology I'd ever heard, but it was something. "Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate that." Bill gave his wife an encouraging nod. "Bill mentioned you grow food for the community food bank," she continued, slightly less stiffly. "That's commendable." "Would you like to see the greenhouse?" I offered, extending an olive branch. "I'm starting seedlings for summer vegetables." Patricia looked genuinely conflicted, but after a moment she nodded. "I suppose that would be educational." I led them through my backyard to the greenhouse. Inside, hundreds of seedlings were growing under carefully controlled conditions. I explained my watering system, the temperature controls, and how I designed everything to maximize growing space. To my surprise, Patricia actually seemed interested. "You're growing heirloom varieties," she noted, examining the labels on some tomato seedlings. "You know about heirloom vegetables?" I asked, surprised. "I was head of the garden club for 10 years, she said with a hint of pride, "before we lost our community garden space to that new parking lot." Something clicked into place. "Is that what happened to the garden club?" Patricia nodded, a flash of genuine emotion crossing her face. "The city council voted to repurpose the land. We tried to fight it, but, well, we lost. The club fell apart afterward." For the first time, I saw Patricia as a person rather than just the HOA tyrant. "That's a shame. Growing food brings people together." "It used to," she said quietly. An idea began forming in my mind. "You know, I have more space than I can use effectively. The far corner would be perfect for some raised beds, but I haven't had time to build them." Bill caught on immediately. "Patricia was just saying she misses having garden space, weren't you, dear?" Patricia looked suspicious, then confused, then cautiously interested. "Are you suggesting some kind of shared gardening arrangement?" "Why not?" I said. "You clearly know what you're doing. We could even expand the community donation program." Over the next hour, an unlikely partnership began to form. Patricia's knowledge of perennial flowers complemented my focus on vegetables. By the time they left, we had sketched out a plan for a community garden corner that would include both food production and ornamental plantings. The following week, Oliver helped us draft a new, clearly defined easement agreement that protected both our interests. The HOA board, now led by Richard, issued a formal acknowledgement that my property was in compliance with all regulations. And Patricia resigned from the Architectural Review Committee, focusing instead on the newly formed Lakewood Community Garden Initiative, which would use part of my land and seek additional spaces throughout the neighborhood. Our unlikely collaboration transformed not just my backyard, but the entire neighborhood dynamic. Within 6 months, we had established 3 community garden spaces in the development, involving 30 families in growing food for themselves and local food banks. Patricia was still Patricia, opinionated and sometimes abrasive, but her energy was channeled into creating rather than controlling. She never admitted that her crusade against my greenhouse had been motivated by jealousy over my garden space after losing hers, but I suspected that was part of it. One afternoon in late summer, as we were harvesting tomatoes together, Patricia paused and looked around at the thriving garden space. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, "but your greenhouse was the best thing to happen to this neighborhood." I smiled as I filled another basket with ripe vegetables. "And your water line running through my property might have been the second best thing." She actually laughed at that. "We make an unlikely team, Mr. Nielsen." "Ethan," I corrected. "And yes, we do." As I looked around at what we'd created, the greenhouse, the community garden spaces, the neighbors working together, I reflected on how differently things could have gone. If I'd simply revoked the easement out of spite, or if Patricia had continued her campaign of harassment, we would have both lost something valuable. Instead, by finding common ground, literally, we'd created something that benefited everyone. The following spring, our community garden initiative won recognition from the Colorado Horticultural Society for neighborhood improvement. Patricia and I stood awkwardly side by side for a photo in the local newspaper, the greenhouse prominently featured in the background. "You know," she said quietly as the photographer packed up, "I really am sorry about how all this started." "Water under the bridge," I replied with a smile. "Or more accurately, water under the easement." For once, Patricia Miller, former HOA tyrant, laughed genuinely at one of my jokes. And I knew that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's finding unexpected common ground with your enemies and growing something new together. The fallout from our conflict had broader implications for the neighborhood as well. Other residents who had been intimidated by Patricia's aggressive enforcement began to speak up about their own issues with the HOA. Richard Baker, the new president, initiated a complete review of the covenant enforcement procedures and established clearer guidelines to prevent harassment. During this process, we discovered that several of the rules Patricia had been enforcing weren't actually in the written covenants at all. They were her personal interpretations that had gone unchallenged for years. The board voted to create a more transparent system where all violation notices required review by at least 2 board members before being issued. As for my greenhouse, it became something of a neighborhood hub. Children from nearby homes would stop by after school to see what was growing. I started hosting monthly seedling swaps where neighbors could exchange plants and gardening tips. Even some of the more traditional residents who had initially supported Patricia's objections came around when they saw the positive impact on the community. The water easement issue led to an unexpected benefit as well. While researching my property rights, I discovered that several other properties in the neighborhood had similar revocable easements that the homeowners weren't aware of. Oliver helped me organize an informational session at the community center to educate everyone about their property rights and responsibilities. "Knowledge is power," Oliver told the gathered residents. "Many HOA disputes arise from misunderstandings about where authority begins and ends." Patricia attended that meeting, sitting quietly in the back. Afterward, she approached Oliver with questions about establishing formal agreements for the community garden spaces to ensure they would continue regardless of property sales or HOA changes. Her regulatory mindset, once directed at control, was being redirected toward protection and sustainability. By midsummer, the impact of our garden initiative was visible throughout the neighborhood. Front yards that had once been uniform expanses of Kentucky bluegrass now featured pollinator-friendly plants and edible landscaping. The HOA board, following our example, revised the landscaping guidelines to encourage water-wise gardening practices appropriate for Colorado's climate. One Saturday morning, as I was installing a drip irrigation system in one of the new community garden areas, I noticed a familiar figure marching purposefully toward me. For a moment, I felt a twinge of the old anxiety Patricia on a mission usually meant trouble. But her expression was determined rather than angry. "Ethan," she said without preamble, "I've been looking at the city council records. They're planning another development that would take out the green space near Oak Street." I straightened up. "The one with all the old cottonwoods," she nodded. "They're meeting next Tuesday to review the proposal. I think we should attend." I raised an eyebrow. "The community garden group," she clarified. "But yes, you and I specifically. You're good with the technical arguments and She hesitated. "You know how to make yourself heard," I finished for her. For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia Miller looked slightly embarrassed. "I've been told I can be somewhat forceful in expressing my opinions." I laughed. "That's one way to put it. But in this case, that might be exactly what we need." Patricia smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "So you'll come?" "Wouldn't miss it," I assured her. "Should we bring visual aids? Maybe some of our harvest to show what community green spaces can produce?" Her eyes lit up with the strategic planning I'd once dreaded. "Perfect. And we should coordinate with the environmental group at the community college. Numbers matter at these hearings." And just like that, the energy that had once made Patricia Miller the neighborhood villain was channeled into community advocacy. The following Tuesday, 25 of us from the Garden Initiative attended the city council meeting, armed with statistics, photographs, and baskets of community-grown produce. Patricia spoke passionately about the importance of accessible green spaces, while I presented data on the environmental benefits of urban gardens versus more development. The council voted to table the development proposal pending further community input, a small victory, but an important one. As we filed out of the meeting, several council members approached us to learn more about our community garden program. "You were brilliant in there," I told Patricia as we walked to the parking lot. "You missed your calling. You should have been an attorney." "I actually started law school," she admitted. "Dropped out when Bill got transferred and we had our daughter. Never went back," she shrugged. "The HOA was my little fiefdom instead." "It's not too late, you know," I said. "For law school, I mean," she laughed. "At my age, I don't think so. But this," she gestured back toward the city hall, "this feels good, making a difference instead of just making rules." The seasonal cycle continued. Fall brought abundant harvests and community preservation classes in my kitchen. Winter saw planning sessions in my greenhouse, now supplemented with efficient LED growing lights. By spring, our initiative had expanded to include 7 community garden spaces throughout Lakewood, including a special accessible garden at the senior center. 1 year after our conflict began, Patricia knocked on my door holding a thick envelope. "The city's Parks and Recreation Department is offering grants for community green space initiatives," she explained, spreading out the application materials on my dining table, the same one where I'd once plotted my easement revocation strategy against her. "I think we should apply for funding to expand the greenhouse concept to other parts of the neighborhood." I looked at her in surprise. "Multiple greenhouses, shared ones," she clarified. "Community resources like the gardens." "The data from your donation program is compelling. Over 3,000 pounds of produce to the food bank this year alone. Imagine what we could do with more growing space." As we worked on the grant application, I marveled at how completely our relationship had transformed. The woman who had once demanded I tear down my greenhouse was now advocating for building more of them. "You know," I said as we finalized the budget section, "none of this would have happened if you hadn't tried to make me remove my greenhouse." Patricia paused, pen in mid-air. "And if you hadn't threatened to revoke my water easement." We looked at each other and both burst out laughing. "We're both stubborn as mules," I acknowledged. "Determined," she corrected with dignity. "We're determined individuals who happen to be working at cross purposes. And now," she gestured to the grant application, "now we're still determined individuals, but we're pulling in the same direction. Much more effective." The grant application was successful. 6 months later, we broke ground on the first community greenhouse in a previously unused corner of the neighborhood park. The HOA, under Richard's continued leadership, contributed funds for the project as well. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Patricia and I stood awkwardly together again for photographs. The local newspaper reporter asked how our partnership had formed. Before I could offer a diplomatic answer, Patricia said bluntly, "We nearly went to war over his greenhouse and a water easement. Instead, we found common ground." The reporter looked confused. "A water easement, it's a long story," I interjected. "With a good ending," Patricia added with surprising gentleness. Later, as we watched neighborhood children explore the new greenhouse with excitement, Bill Miller approached me with a handshake. "I never properly thanked you," he said. "For what?" "For not going through with the easement revocation. That would have been financially devastating for us. But more importantly," he glanced at Patricia, who was explaining the irrigation system to a group of interested seniors, "you gave Patricia something better than the HOA. You gave her purpose again." I watched as Patricia gesticulated enthusiastically, her former rigid demeanor replaced with genuine passion. "I think we gave each other something," I replied. "Perspective, maybe." 2 years after our conflict began, my property had transformed from a battleground to a community hub. The greenhouse that Patricia had tried to tear down had sparked a neighborhood renaissance. Property values increased not because of rigid enforcement of arbitrary standards, but because Lakewood had become known as a community that valued sustainability and connection. The water easement that had given me leverage remained in place, protected now by a clearly written agreement that benefited both parties. Patricia and I had both learned valuable lessons about power, compromise, and finding unexpected common ground. As I tended to my tomato plants one evening, watching the sunset through the polycarbonate panels of my greenhouse, Patricia appeared at the door with a basket of fresh herbs from her section of the garden. "For your dinner," she explained, placing them on my workbench. "The basil's particularly good this year." "Thanks," I said. "Staying for coffee," she checked her watch. "Can't today. Meeting with the city planner about the new community garden ordinance." Her eyes gleamed with the familiar intensity that had once been directed at enforcing HOA regulations. "Did you review the draft I sent you?" "Sent my comments this morning. It looks solid." She nodded with satisfaction. "Good, we need to get this right. Other neighborhoods are looking to replicate our model." As she turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. "You know, Ethan, I've been thinking. Sometimes the worst conflicts lead to the best solutions." I smiled as I pinched back a leggy seedling. "Especially when both sides are stubborn enough not to give up, but smart enough to change course." "Determined," she corrected with a small smile. "The word is determined." As I watched Patricia walk purposefully through the garden that had grown from our conflict, I reflected on how the threatened revocation of a water easement had ironically led to more connections between neighbors, between community members, and between ourselves and the land we shared. The greenhouse stood as a testament to what happens when we choose to build rather than tear down, when we redirect energy from conflict to creation. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who seems most determined to stand in your way might become your most valuable ally in building something better than either of you could have created alone.